So, while I was doing research on the villain Skylanders video, I stumbled upon a nugget of information involving bad juju, and that information is that she was apparently inspired by a character from League of Legends, Orianna. And out of curiosity, I decided to take a look at her backstory, and from what I read about her in the League of Legends wiki, she has some pretty interesting lore. So I decided to do a little more digging into some of the other characters in this game, and I think I underestimated how borderline insane the lore of League of Legends is. If any of the Skylanders guys are here and think that Skylanders sleeper lore is crazy, it is cupcakes to a goddamn wedding cake. And if you think I'm bluffing, there is so much lore packed into this game that even the skin lines have lore to them. As a YouTuber who goes over the lore of another game, Skylanders, I immediately realized that the League of Legends franchise is more of a goldmine than I ever realized. But as I was thinking about making a video about one of these characters, two ugly heads immediately began to become apparent, one of them worse than the other. And the other head was the fact that I have never played League of Legends before. The only real experience I have with League of Legends as a whole is Arcane, the almost godly music videos and trailers, and that funny VTuber guy who reviews skins sometimes. So I decided to combat this by making a new series for the channel, Outsiders In. This not only gives me the opportunity to go over the lore of characters that aren't Skylanders for once, but it also allows me to talk about other franchises from an outsider's perspective that is blatantly clear to that community. AKA, I won't be immediately swarmed and murdered for not knowing what I'm talking about. So with that said and done, I think it's about time that I get on to the other major issue. Who do I talk about? It's not like Skylanders where the lore is like a few paragraphs and maybe a comic. Their lores are so long and so intertwined that I would have to do a deep dive on the location or aspect of the world if I talked about a character outside of Piltover or Zon, the only places in this franchise that I somewhat recognize. That gives me access to about 26 champions that I can talk about, and as I was looking at all these characters with all these crazy backstories and designs, I think I picked the most controversial one. But before I jump into this, I like to make it clear that I know almost nothing about League of Legends lore and that I'm getting most of my information from the starry-eyed Songstress up on the wiki, and some YouTube videos talking about a reception. But I will be leaving out the background section on the wiki as it has a couple of nasty contradictions like her mom being dead and some other stuff that muddies the water. So I apologize if I screw something up or miss it. But with that out the way, let's get straight into this. Even though Seraphine herself was born in Piltover, her parents actually come from the dumpster fire next door known as Zon, and pretty much abandoned everything they knew so their family could have a shot at a better life. If you don't understand the situation, Zon is basically fantasy Chicago with a dark green hue, the drugs and crime cranked up to 11, and living standards so god-awful that most people have a defect or medical condition from the air alone, while their next door neighbors, the city of Piltover, is a steampunk almost utopia where they use hex tech to push the bounds of science to make a better future for themselves. And because of the reckless industry practices and borderline lack of care on the side of Piltover, they are pretty much the biggest reason why Zon is the cesspit it is in the first place. And spoiler alert, these two really hate each other's guts. There's also the enforcers, but I'll get to them later. As a child, Seraphine always loved music, especially her father's lullabies, something that she saw as beautiful but sad, which makes sense since they originally came from Zon. Seraphine would occasionally lean out the window of her family's acoustics workshop and sing along with the streets of Piltover, hearing the shanties of the Sun Gates, whistling of apprentices, and even the basic conversations of people who passed by. But as time went on, she began to hear other people's thoughts. As she grew, her gift grew stronger and stronger, and to her, the once harmonious streets that she loved became an unending blob of noise and sound. And some days it was so bad that she could be found shivering in the corner of her home, covering her ears in a desperate attempt to make the voices stop. At that point, her parents couldn't bear to see her struggle like that any longer, so they would take all the savings that they had gathered up to that point and buy a rare Hextech crystal, using it to make the equivalent of a magic hearing aid that would dampen her magical hearing. And for the first time in years, everything was silent, and even though everything was quiet for Seraphine, she could still hear something, and that would be the crystal itself. Apparently, the being within the crystal is something known as a Brackern, or at least related to one, and even though it was really hard to comprehend at the time, she could tell that whatever she was hearing was a really wise and old creature, Seraphine being able to hear thousands of years of history singing in unison. She would ask the voice for guidance, as she felt that she became the voices of those around her and never truly developed a voice of her own. And the voice would respond by telling her that we are all forged through others' voices. Over time, she would learn how to manage the voices of others and instead sing with them. And because of this, she would begin to use her dampener less and less by the day. When she went on stage for the first time to perform, she was nervous out of her mind, but she would push through, and eventually, she grew so large that the biggest venues in Piltover were overflowing with her fans, and even though she was famous beyond words, she would still feel like there was something missing, and because of this, she would go to another city to seek a different perspective. Zaun. When she was in the world under her own, she would hear the thoughts of the people there, and even though she heard the same resilience that she had heard above, the longer she was down there, the more she sensed the fear they had of the Chem Barons and the hatred for the people of Piltover. When Seraphine performed for them, she would listen to the people of Zaun, and over time, she would make mending the cities together a goal. But even she understood that this was deeper than a simple misunderstanding, and she always kept hearing the same thing. It's not that simple in Zaun, and eventually, Piltover would feel less like home. She had already heard stories from the voice in her crystal about what unchecked hatred like the one she was witnessing could do, and she wouldn't allow it to happen. So she got together with her parents to dismantle her dampener and turn it into a platform that would instead amplify her powers, allowing her to understand the thoughts of others at a more complex level. She would ride her platform like a board and step out onto the entresol that separated Piltover and Zaun, hoping that the voice from the crystal would be present amongst the crowd, and as the crowd itself gathered and the lights dazzled, she began to realize something. Both Pilties and Zaunites were part of the crowd, and she began to hear them. And even crazier, both peoples came together just to hear her sing, they themselves singing a song of unity. The song wasn't perfect, and it probably never will be, but Seraphine realized something. Maybe she could help others find their voice too. What does that even mean? Seraphine now has become a premier star in both cities, amplifying the voice of all with a fresh force of optimism because to her, everyone deserves to be heard, especially those who are struggling. The voices serve as an inspiration to her, so she wants to do everything she can to inspire them as well. So with that out the way, let's actually get into my thoughts about this. Now, before I start jumping into this, I'd like to say that I'm kinda glad that I chose Seraphine to be the first champion I cover. Not only is her story pretty detached from other champions, if you exclude KDA, because good god, there's so much stuff going on there, but it actually reminds me of Skylanders lore to an extent. Yeah, it's probably because I don't know a thing about League, but it kinda makes me excited to learn about other champions and probably play them in the background. But it also brings us to the biggest problem with her backstory for me. It kinda just feels off. The biggest reason I decided to pick her is because of how different she is from other champions from both Zaun and Piltover. Now, Zaun makes complete sense, as it's going for a completely different aesthetic, but she even feels disconnected from the other champions in Piltover. They all have this steampunk/technological feel that make them all fit into the aesthetic. Vi has her giant metal fists and outfits, Caitlyn has her dress and sniper rifle, Oriana is Oriana, and Camille has her thighs. I'm not even trying to simp for the robot lady, but just look at them. She has grapple hooks in her thighs and her legs are swords. That has to be one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And they managed to not betray the aesthetic because of her design and her color palette. But when you look at Seraphine, she doesn't even look like she came from Zaun or Piltover. Her colors are just too damn bright. Even her theme is different from everyone else's, most of Piltover's champions being more orchestral while hers sounds more like something you would hear on the radio on the way to work. And all it makes me wonder is why, and I think I have a clue. Remember that thing I was talking about when it comes to skins? Well, if the wiki is correct, Seraphine has 10 skins, and I originally thought that she had 10 different timelines that I could potentially cover. But that's when I immediately realized something. 3 of these skins came from the same theme. KDA All Out. Now, if you don't know what KDA is, which heck, even I know about it, KDA is one of, if not the biggest things that Riot has ever done. To the point that not only is one of their music videos the most popular one on the official League of Legends YouTube, while another one is their 6th, which also includes Seraphine by the way, but they also had live performances and in-game events surrounding it in the past. It is glaringly obvious to anyone that KDA is extremely popular and that Riot was going to capitalize on it. And weirdly enough, Seraphine launched with these skins the same day she became a champion. One of them being an ultimate skin, which are apparently a pretty huge deal in the League of Legends community, along with the fact that this was the first time this has ever happened with a skin of that caliber. And after a little more digging, there was apparently an official Twitter account for Seraphine that was promoting the character before her release, and doing some weird parasocial stuff as well, which I'm not equipped to talk about at all, so here's a link to someone who knows what they're doing. Besides that, the Twitter account in question wasn't promoting this Seraphine, it was promoting this Seraphine. And I think that's why she feels so off when you compare her to other champions from the region she's in. Riot probably put more focus into KDA Seraphine than actual Seraphine, because KDA makes an insane amount of bank, and because of that, she suffered for it. I think that's also the reason why she was hated by a lot of players on release. She was basically undercooked because the chef put too much effort into what should have been the frosting. But please take this all with a pinch of salt, since once again, it's just an outsider's perspective on this, and there's also a lot of other reasons that I don't have time to talk about. So if you're curious about that, here's another video going over the Seraphine debacle when it happened. But still, even though it has a lot of problems, like her not becoming an activist, because in my opinion, that's where it seemed to be leading, it would make her work in the setting, give her a reason to stand out as much as she does, and give her a goal by the end of things, along with some stuff that I probably haven't noticed, I'm going to be honest and say that I did enjoy reading her backstory, and I'm hoping that this video does well so I can take a look at more champions. But with that out the way, thank you all for watching and giving this video a shot. For my Skylanders viewers, I know this is pretty out there from what I usually do, but once again, I kinda wanted to just branch out a bit. And for any League guys who stumble upon this video, tell me what you think in the comments below, but please, go easy on me. You can probably tell from the gameplay, I am literally a newborn when it comes to this franchise. But with that out the way, once again, thank you for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, and I will see you all in the next one.